Thank you for joining us for our second installment of our Housing for All webinar hosted by the Dallas Housing Coalition. My name is Andrea Glispie, and I'm Senior Manager of Community Development at Charles Schwab Bank. And I am a member of the Dallas Housing Coalition Board of Directors, and of course, your host for this regular, I should say, now that we're into our second episode of our Housing for All webinar. On our Housing for All webinar, we discussed whether Dallas is big and if it is truly big enough for everyone. Our plan, like last week and in future webinars, is to have brief but impactful conversations with Dallas Housing Coalition members and other community leaders who are Dallas's strongest advocates for keeping Dallas affordable. This will be our final webinar before the holidays. Can't believe the holidays are around the corner. But we will continue the series every Friday at 11 a.m. after the beginning of the new year. So let's get started. Joining us today is Dallas City Councilmember Chad West, who proudly represents North Oak Cliff and has since 2019. Chad is the son of a school teacher, a former U.S. Army officer, an honorably discharged combat veteran, a Texas Tech Law School graduate, and father of two. Before being elected to the City Council, Chad served as the Dallas City Plan Commissioner, served on the Dallas City Plan Commission, where he was an advocate for and drafter of the Live Work Accessible Dwelling Units and exclusionary zoning ordinances that the City of Dallas still uses today to create more housing for residents for all income levels. On council, Chad continues to be one of the most vocal advocates for more walkable neighborhoods, parking reform, workforce housing, and connected neighborhoods. And I did get Councilmember West permission to call him Chad throughout the webinar, so we're going to keep it very informal at that point. But welcome, Chad. It's so good to have you joining us today.
Yeah, very happy to be here. I want to thank you and the coalition for what you do. Like I've told Brian this before, and many members of your organization. Before this group formed up, we did not have this in Dallas. There's no one showing up regularly to the city of Dallas advocating for the people that can't be there because they're working, because they're trying to stay in their homes and live in Dallas and feed their families. And so I'm very very happy to help your group and your members in their goals to create more housing and rooftops in our city. It's our most dire need right now, and thank you for having me and letting me be a part of this today.
Well, we're so lucky to have you. I know your schedule, like many of us, is very busy this time of year, so we really appreciate having you and being able to
thank you. I'm going out of town on the kiddos and I were going to see the rest of the family. We're going down to Florida, leaving on Sunday. And so today, other than this, I have one more city meeting and that city related meeting. Then I've got to get my Christmas shopping done. I literally have not shopped for most everybody that I'm going to see next week. And I got to get some more stuff for the kids or something for them. So we, first world problems, but it's got to happen today, and or it's not going to happen. So that's what I'm doing after this.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to, at a future webinar, share parenting hacks because I see that you're working and juggling a public life plus kids. There's a lot. So I appreciate the time you're putting into this today. And just to kind of get us started, I kind of alluded to this in just sharing your biography with all our viewers, but you are a steadfast advocate for housing affordability here in Dallas since really being elected in May of 2019. And at one point, even serving as chair of the Housing and Homelessness Solutions Council Committee. Fast forward to today, you've gotten the ball rolling to potentially reduce Dallas's minimum lot size requirements and spoke at the Dallas Housing Coalition rally for housing bond funding outside City Hall in September. So there's a lot there that is very exciting and commendable. What is your inspiration for championing and focusing so intently on housing?
I mean, when I first, I own car washes now. I own businesses. I'm a recovering lawyer, and I'm privileged and blessed to have gotten to the point in my life where I can afford to live in Dallas. And I mean, it's not easy. I can't afford to live in Highland Park, Preston Hall. I mean, I've got places I can afford and can't afford, just like everyone else. Not that I would want to live there. No offense. Very happy in Oak Cliff. But when I first graduated from law school, I was in debt. I had not really started working yet. And even my first job that I did have out of law school was a $50,000 a year job working for I was a law clerk working for a judge. Back then, that was probably at the higher levels of the AMI, the adjusted median income level. For affordable housing now, like it's below the median level. And I was in that category. I had a real hard time finding housing in the city of Dallas, and I was pretty much on average. And so when I finally had, I just remember those struggles, right? I can't imagine having to worry about kids and my family on top of trying to find housing. Housing was like the one thing I had to focus on because I was single at the time. I didn't have any kids, and you add the additional complications of being a grown up on top of just taking care of yourself. You know, maybe you have an elderly person or a sister or brother, or especially children. It's a huge struggle, and if housing, if that safety net is ripped from you, a lot of other things can crumble very quickly. So I saw that. I've dug into the data when I was the Housing and Homelessness Solutions Chair, and I saw the trajectory we were going towards as a city and continue to go towards. And it just, in the limited time I'm here as an elected official, this is my number one goal, is to ensure that we have, at least we're on the right path to build the housing that we need in our city and preserve it, to let as many people live in the city that want to. And the biggest challenge, you know, frankly, since we have limited time today, I definitely at some point want to touch on the NIMBY. Like, the NIMBY is strong in this city. The NIMBY is strong on Dallas City Council. And that's the thing that I'm going to continue to fight against, is educating folks and fighting against those that just are throwing out misinformation.
Actually, Chad, let's go there. That was actually one of the next questions I was going to ask is,
Sure.
as you've done this work as a public official, what are some of the common misconceptions that you've run into around affordable or attainable housing?
Oh my gosh, you can really just pull anything out of the air, and it can be used as a misconception. The one thing is just the terminology confuses people. I try to push all advocates now, and I would encourage the coalition to switch your terminology from affordable to workforce. So when you're talking about housing that people can afford in the city, if whenever you can, use the verbiage workforce housing. Should we have to do that? No, we shouldn't have to do that. But frankly, you're never going to even touch 80% of Dallas with your messaging, with my messaging, and they hear the word affordable. A lot of them will just shut down, and they turn it off. I don't know why. If it's just a psychological thing, they just associate that with welfare housing. I've heard that before. Voucher housing, and that is a needed housing category as well. But when we talk about workforce housing, that's the vast majority of what we need in the city. That's a valid terminology that we can all fight for. And it's hard for even the worst NIMBYs to say, oh, I don't want teachers or nurses or first year police and firefighters living in my neighborhoods. I mean, who's going to say no to that? I mean, if they're going to say no to that publicly, they're going to turn the rest of the room in your favor. And you kind of want them. You want those NIMBYs to come out because it'll help your cause. But that terminology is one of the big things. Minimum lot size is a discussion in and of itself. The memorandum I filed with 4 of my colleagues who were very courageous in signing on to that it really is addressing two major things. One is relooking at the minimum lot sizes that we have in the city, which I'll touch on in a second. And the other is expanding our view of single family neighborhoods from just your traditional house to a lot with maybe a duplex on it, or a house and an ADU in the back, accessory dwelling unit, or a threeplex or fourplex. Two different conversations, but the memo addresses both. And importantly, I have to remind my colleagues, and I've had to remind the media of this, all the memo did was open up the discussion. So my colleagues who are pushing back on even having that, that's just crazy to me. Like, let's open up the discussion. Let's force the city plan commission to actually start reviewing best practices, and let's get it going now, because if we don't start now, like 4 or 5 years from now, we're gonna be in the same place. So the first thing, and stop me if I'm just droning on too much, but the first thing is the minimum lot size. Our zoning for our entire city was created back in the 1950s and 60s, when we were more of a suburban city from end to end. And it was laid out throughout the city that, the traditional Norman Rockwell family would want to have a 50 by 100 or a 75 by 100 foot lot. So they could have a nice home, a fence, a big yard for the kids and dogs to run around, and just this picturesque American society from that era, that everyone wanted. And that's great. And there's nothing wrong with that. I've got a very similar lot in the home I live in. It's great. I sometimes don't want my yard. Right now I don't particularly, but a lot of the millennials and the younger people especially, and then a lot of the older folks that are retiring and they're empty nesters, they are completely okay with not having a traditional 50 by 100 lot. So our zoning has not kept up with the changing times. So this memo asks or directs the city to go in, review where we are now as a city, where trends are with society, and does our current zoning still make sense? That's like 70 years old in some cases. I don't think it does make sense, frankly, citywide. But there are some neighborhoods maybe it does still make sense. It's just having that discussion. Second thing is opening up the city's single family neighborhoods to a little bit what you would call gentle density, and that's duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes. This is something we have a lot of misconception around, even in my neighborhood, which is pretty progressive. And you talk about gentle density and neighbors will think, oh my gosh, I don't want my street to become Bishop Arts. It's like, well, this would not propose that, and it would not enact that. Bishop Arts is, whether you love it or hate it, was designed to become what it is, which is apartment complexes, consolidated lots. The zoning before my time pushed that, because the market saw the potential and said, you know what, the zoning is here, we're going to take it. Those are 30, 50, 300 plexes in Bishop Arts that are there or coming. And that's not anywhere close to gentle density of 2, 3, 4 plexes, even 6 and 8 plexes. And what I tell neighbors who've had concerns is walk through Winnetka Heights, walk through Kings Highway neighborhood. Those are neighborhoods that are predominantly single family, but have these gentle density lots mixed in where you've got the fourplexes and eightplexes. Even in Highland Park, you go around Highland Park, you really pay attention to the streets you're on, you'll see a lot of times at the end of the blocks, a duplex or a triplex or a fourplex, especially on the peripheral streets around that city, because that was built back in the 1900s and 1920s for the help, for the maids and the butlers who serviced the mansions over there. So in Highland Park, property values are doing just fine, even with that gentle density in their neighborhoods. So those are all conceptions that we hear. And despite how reasonable, at least in my mind, that sounds, it really does scare a lot of people that they think we're going to come in, the city is developer's going to raise all their homes and they're going to throw up an apartment complex. And that's the NIMBY like mentality that is pushed out on people who might not be as plugged into City Hall to know better. And so I feel like it's my job. Hopefully, you feel a calling as well to go out and educate, hear their fears, and talk through it.
Thank you so much for that just very informative download on the issues around minimum lot size and also the tension between creating more density within the framework of what we see as traditional single family neighborhoods. And you just did a great through line between those two issues and the misconceptions that stem from them. So thank you for that. You mentioned something important that I wanted to come back to, and that it leads to my next question is to what can be done to address some of these misconceptions that you named. You raised an important point about just having the conversation about what the needs are and how they've changed since some of our laws were first enacted, in some cases 6 or more decades ago. What other things can be done to address some of these misconceptions?
Great question. One, if you go into a fight, you like to be armed, right? And I mean, generally, if you're able to be armed and the other guy's not, and you're defending yourself, I mean, you're gonna do well. This is in some levels a battle. If you looked at what happened in Austin recently, it got really ugly down there. A lot of the NIMBYs who fought lot size reform, I mean, they have lawyers, they have very big, deep pockets. I don't really even understand why they're so against it. I probably need to dig into that a little more myself, but it's a strong lobby against it. And what we have on our side is facts. That's our weapon and our armor as well. And you can use data such as the Child Poverty Action Lab's spring 2023 renter. I forgot the correct name, but it's like their rental data that they published. The Child Poverty Action Lab is neutral organization, privately funded, and it's and also through mostly grants. And their data they provided showed that we are 55,000 rental units short right now in the city. Right now, we're 55,000 rental units short to meet our lower AMI categories. So like people making 50,000 ish right now, our mail carriers, substitute teachers, stuff like that. If we do nothing other than what we're doing right now, we will be 88,000 units short in 2030. And it just gets worse after that. And we're short in all categories. The worst one is kind of that $50,000, $45,000 range. I mean, that's your service workers, your waiters, your folks in service industry too. And so we've got the fact, like the need is there. There's no, like, you can't question data like that. So that need is there. There's also studies that are published, which I believe you guys have, and I'll make sure you do if you don't have it, which states that changing minimum lot sizes, allowing duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes by right, does not end up in this wave of destruction of your single family neighborhoods. We didn't see that in Minneapolis. You haven't seen that in Houston. And there's not a prediction that you're going to see that in Austin. And so Dallas is not at risk based on the data that's been published already from cities that have already gone through these reforms. So talking about it in the sense of here's the need, here's why this won't hurt you as a city, just putting that data out there and reminding folks of that constantly is important. The media is mostly, I think, on the side of us on this. I think the media understands that these reforms need to at least be discussed, if not enacted. So I don't think that's an issue. What is the biggest hurdle that we face for this is that you've got 15 council members, including the mayor, that can hold up these reforms. And a lot of council members some council members are influenced by 4 or 5 people showing up at the Horseshoe, saying we don't want this because we're concerned about traffic, or we're concerned about, you know, insert the blank. And go back. I encourage you, if you want some brain damage, go back and watch the daycare ordinance discussion we talked about on Wednesday. I was about to pull my hair out at my colleagues that don't want to make it as easy as possible for people to build daycares for seniors and daycares for children under 5 in our city. There's some colleagues that really need daycares the most in their areas, and I'm not going to name them here. They were the ones that were like the most NIMBY about putting it in there. I couldn't believe it. And I feel like you're going to see some of the same pushback from some of the same folks when the battle lines are drawn on this gentle density, because the votes are in their districts are controlled by a very small percentage of the population. And the people who do vote there don't want anything to change in their neighborhoods at all, ever.
Yeah.
And that is our biggest risk, is the NIMBYs get to them first, and the political will is not there to push forward meaningful reforms.
Yeah. Well, that actually is a great segue into my next question as we start to round out our conversation. And I want to take us to the 2024 capital bond program.
Yeah.
That the city council is hearing and considering right now. We know that preparations for this upcoming bond program began way back in the fall of 2022, but finally reached the Horseshoe in a presentation to the city council last week. You also received draft funding proposals from both city staff and the Community Bond Task Force. And we know that there were over 130 members of the community who came out to speak to you and your colleagues.
That was fantastic.
Yeah. Awesome. And I'm just curious, with all that we've talked about so far about misconceptions and fighting them and the most prevalent issues that you're distilling right now, what were your key takeaways from that day?
Well, I mean, the housing, pro-housing folks, you led by your coalition and others are very organized and passionate about seeing meaningful bond monies added for housing. So that was a key. And something that didn't surprise me was that everyone's passionate about everything, right? There's a million needs out there, and the reality that we all face, and I'm a supporter of putting a lot more money in the housing bond. I've said that publicly, and I'll just reiterate that now. The reality of, like, even I'm dealing with is my neighbors have been telling me for 4 years now, since I've been in office, Annie Stevens Park's playground equipment's falling apart. My seniors, 98% Hispanic around Martin Weiss Rec Center, lower income area. They're like, we absolutely have to redo Martin Weiss Rec Center. It's not fit for seniors. The Stevens Park golf course is not ADA accessible. There's one stall in the women's bathroom for all the women that play golf. These are the kinds of things that we're having to juggle, right? And it's how do we find money for everything? And the task force, I think we have to start. I disagree with some of my colleagues that say we need to start with the city manager's recommendation. I do think we need to start with the task force's recommendation, because that's the people we appointed who have been working for a long time on this. So I think we were a little bit harsh as a council towards Arun and their efforts. However, housing is the one thing I don't think they got right. And it's not going to make any kind of meaningful impact, with such a low amount put into the housing category. So I believe that the city manager has some capacity to increase the bond. I would like to see the majority of that go to housing. And I think to get the bond passed, we're going to have to put some more towards streets as well. I just think the voters in North Dallas who do show up to vote for this stuff, they're going to demand street repairs. That's what they always show up for some reason. So, I mean, it is important, but that's their priority. Yeah. So, and that's where I'm at. A lot of this is going to get worked out behind the scenes. And I will tell you, Basil Dua, myself, there's a couple others really advocating for more money in housing. And this is when you guys can be very impactful right now by reaching out to your council members and saying, we don't care if it's the city manager, we don't care if it's the mayor or the task force on this, like, just get us more money in housing. Like, you don't have to tell us exactly what you want in there unless you have, I think Brian has told me he has a number, but you know, just say you want more in housing, just get us to that number and figure it out. And we will.
Well, thank you so much, Chad. We will definitely have to leave it there. I for one appreciate again your time and just all the insights that you shared, and the time that you put in championing and raising these important issues related to housing. So best of luck on all your Christmas shopping and getting ready to get out of town, and hope you can. And with that, before we sign off, I just wanted to remind all our viewers that please follow all the socials on for Dallas Housing Coalition in order to get the latest updates on what the coalition is working on and how you can get involved. And, you know, just to stay connected and make sure you're aware and a part of our next Housing for All webinar episode. While you're at it, go to the Dallas Housing Coalition's webpage at dallashousingcoalition.com to learn more about the issues we discussed today, and just educate yourself specifically on the 2024 Dallas Bond Program. Thank you again for tuning in to our second episode of Housing for All, where we discuss whether Dallas is big and if it is truly big enough for everyone. Tune in after the new year on Friday, January 5th at 11 a.m. for our next conversation. Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays.